The North Gauteng High Court is currently hearing details from the autopsy of Riva Steenkamp. Now, the judge in the Oscar Pistorius murder trial earlier ordered a ban on the live feed of testimony by pathologists. That's Professor Gert Simon. The trial is in its second week. State Prosecutor Gerrie Nels asked the court to rule that Professor Simon's verbal evidence not be broadcast because of the graphic details of the post-mortem on Steenkamp. The defense supported that application. Professor Simon explained to the court his reservations about that broadcast. He said issues of morality and the dignity of the deceased and her family must be considered. An adjournment was called for legal representatives of the media to address the court. Guard Shift leader, that's Peter Barber, testified this morning that he called Pistorius on the morning of the murder. Barber said Pistorius responded that everything was fine. Reports claim Oscar Pistorius vomited in court as he heard the autopsy report. Our reporter Patricia Vasaki is tracking the case. She joins us from the North Gauteng High Court now. Good afternoon, Patricia.
Good afternoon.
Take us through some of the key points in Mr. Simon's arguments to persuade Judge Masipa to ban the broadcast of this autopsy report.
Well, Kashni, talking about that ban, I must tell you, today was probably one of the difficult days of since this trial had started, and of course it entered its sixth day today. And the reason being, it was a difficult day for all parties involved, for the media, for Oscar Pistorius himself, and of course for the Steenkamp family. And this because we saw the first forensic expert taking the stand, and that is Professor Gert Simon, who gave a very detailed, graphic, explanation of the pathology report, or the post-mortem results, if you may, of Riva Steenkamp. And of course, we saw Oscar Pistorius, while Professor Simon gave this testimony in court, he could not take it. It was a little bit too much for Oscar Pistorius. He sat in court sobbing right through to a point where he even started getting nauseous and he started vomiting in court. But talking more about the details that emerged while Professor Gert Simon gave testimony of the post-mortem results, I'm joined right now by a forensic expert, and that is Laurie James, who will take us through what was said in court today. Now, Laurie, we heard graphic details of, the wounds that Riva Steenkamp must have suffered. Can we talk more about the ammunition, or rather the bullets that injured her on the morning of Valentine's Day?
Yes, certainly. The type of ammunition used was called black talon ammunition. Now, what happens with this ammunition? It's essentially hollow point type ammunition, and it's designed purely to cause, it's got high stopping power and to cause massive, catastrophic tissue damage once it actually connects with any sort of tissue. So in other words, it will cause massive hemorrhaging. This ammunition actually compacts, flattens, and then mushrooms. And then what happens is pieces of it actually break off, forming multiple projectiles. Another thing that also automatically happens when you strike bone with this type of ammunition is that your bone will actually splinter off and cause secondary projectiles, which then also cause a significant amount of damage. But the basic function of this ammunition is to cause massive, catastrophic damage to the tissue.
Of course, 3 shots and Riva Steenkamp didn't make it. Could we say that the severity of that ammunition could have caused instant death?
Absolutely, probably not instant, but definitely the head wound would have caused instant incapacitation, although probably the brain stem function, the functions that involve breathing and the heartbeat, wouldn't have stopped immediately, but she would have been incapable of cognitive thought. But independently, any one of these injuries independently could have actually caused death. The arm wound, because of the nature of the bleeding that was inflicted with the shattering of this bone, unless she received a medical tourniquet or expert medical attention instantly, that would have led to a death by exsanguination. The same thing would have happened with the hip, which actually, it's very, very difficult. Any hip wound is usually a major problem because of the damage. The hip bone was also shattered, causing secondary projectiles. So to stem that bleeding is almost impossible without surgery. And of course the head wound, the part of the projectile or a piece of bone caused an exit wound, the other part lodged on the bullet tract into the brain. Now what you have to understand is it's not only the damage from the bullet, but we actually have something called the tract of the wound, which is the bullet tracking through the tissue. But then you have something else called percussion tract, which is as the bullet tracks, it sends out kinetic energy, which actually opens a tract of a significant diameter around the main projectile. So that will also cause additional damage and additional hemorrhaging.
Well, shocking details indeed. What does this mean for the state's case against Oscar Pistorius?
Well, it's definitely important to establish the actual cause of death, and I think this is the evidence that will do that. It's the pathology report, which should be able to give you your exact cause of death, and then of course this evidence will then be backed up further down the trial by the blood spatter evidence and the ballistic evidence, and probably even the evidence of the analysis of the door.
Now, Professor Gert Simon also testified that they found semi-digested pieces of vegetables in Riva Steenkamp's stomach, if you may, and that suggests that she must have eaten that about 2 hours before her death. And we know that Oscar Pistorius told the court, or rather in his affidavit, that they must have gone to bed around 10 o'clock. What can we summarize from that?
Well, that is fairly damning evidence when used in conjunction with Oscar's statement of going to bed at about 10 o'clock, because this evidence proves then, or not conclusively, because there's a little bit of leeway, of course, as there always is with pathological evidence and digestion, but she must have eaten somewhere in the vicinity of around 1 o'clock, which would then dispute his evidence of going to sleep at 10 o'clock. So there must have been something going on that caused her to eat at approximately 1 o'clock.
Now, from your point of view, of course, we're expecting Professor Gert Simon to continue with his testimony tomorrow. Is there anything that you think that he might still continue to touch on tomorrow that's very important in such a report?
Well, of course, tomorrow he will go under cross-examination. He's touched on not only the major wounds, but also a lot of peripheral wounds, wounds that could have been caused by splinters and so on. Obviously, in cross-examination, this may be fleshed out further, which has been the trend during the entire trial. The cross-examination is long and rigorous. So I think there will be more details of emerging of exactly the nature of these injuries and an exact sort of a more focused cause of death.
Thank you so much. And that is the forensic expert joining us here from outside the North Gauteng High Court, and that is Laurie James, who just gave us a brief description, or rather analysis, of the testimony of Professor Gert Simon, the pathologist who testified today in the Pistorius murder trial here at the North Gauteng High Court. Back to you in the studio.
The SABC's Patricia Vasachi, thank you for your time.